I think now it's a pretty safe place to start. And it's a bit of a bummer because I feel like this guy was never in a position to succeed. Jeremy Colliton is now out as Chicago Blackhawks head coach. A few assistants go with him. It feels like everyone except Mark Crawford has a job in Chicago now. Derek King is the interim. He was originally with Rockford. He'll be there for the whole of the season, apparently. Now, this is right after the Blackhawks lost 5-1 to the Jets, and at that time, I don't know if they played since. I don't think they have. Their record is now 1-9-2. Not great, but not a surprise firing either, to be honest.
I saw some people complaining about. So remember a couple of weeks ago, the picture floated around of Jeremy Colliton handing the board to the players at the timeout. And they're like, well, you could have just fired him then. I don't know. Like, the timeline here is that happens 2 days later, the Jenner and Block report is released. Yeah. So just my personal guess is they didn't want to fire him in the middle of the aftermath of that coming out. So, like, it was going to happen. He was put in a horrible situation to begin with. Like, was he not booed the first night he coached? Because he was
for the home opener. Yeah, he was booed.
I think he's been booed since the day he took over.
Like, I feel bad for him because management put him in such a horrible situation because he's not Joel Quenneville. Like, that's what it was at the time when he was hired. We knew there was butting heads between management and Quenneville. Like, that's been the rumor for years. So to throw him in there then when they were like 500 Chicago at the time was just, it was not a great move by management, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree that he was put into an impossible task of trying to build a winner with the roster that they had at the time, where they were still relying on all of the older guys. They were not having much depth. And if Joel Quenneville could not turn that team around, I don't think Jeremy Colliton could do any better. And listen, like, what was going on with him this year, what was going on with the Blackhawks, like, the writing was on the wall already. I agree with you, Alex, that I was really surprised that he did stay this long. I thought, based on how last year went, especially towards the end where there was that sudden collapse of the Blackhawks out of that second wildcard spot, I really thought it was coming in the offseason. So for me, I was surprised that he still stayed, I guess, about 10 games into this season.
So, but by the way, in case anyone is wondering, Colliton was, I want to say, so he retired from playing in 2014. He only ever played in the NHL for the Islanders. So he was never a part of what happened with Kyle Beach in the Blackhawks organization. Again, I think he was hired in 2017 to Rockford as their head coach at the time. So yeah, that's after the Akeem Alou stuff. So he isn't a part of that. You see, now he was, I believe, when he was hired, and right now he is 30. He's 36 now. At the time of his hiring, and maybe even still today, he's the youngest coach in the league, or head coach, I should say. And he was kind of put into this scenario where you'll feel like where the Blackhawks were, they didn't have Panarin anymore. Obviously, Hjalmarsson was gone. Duncan Keith wasn't the same anymore. Seabrook was been on and off playing period the past couple of years before he quote unquote retired. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we're rebuilding. Okay, he has this young team up and coming. We can see what he can do. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, no, we're being back to this, competitive team. And it's just, he was never in a position to succeed. And, you have management who, Stan Bowman at the time, before he was obviously stepped down from the Blackhawks stuff, he sort of lost. There was no real vision building that team after, like, since that notorious series against Nashville in 2017, the Blackhawks lost all vision of what they were and where the team was going. And it was just Colliton had no chance. I'm sure he'll be hired as an assistant sometime. I would give that guy a chance. He wasn't perfect, like how he was treating Dylan Strome. Like, that guy isn't going to succeed as your fourth line center in that. But, there's, like, he's got to learn. You know what I mean? Especially because he followed Joel Quenneville. and again, and we're ignoring like on the side here. It's like obviously Quinville is no saint. We all know what happened with the Kyle Beach stuff, but there is still that level of coach and that like that presence there that he was never. He was having to coach players that were like the same age as him. Like, how do you go in as your first NHL head coach job and tell Patrick Kane how to play? You can't do that. Like, there's a certain level of. I think back to Minnesota and Parise and Suter and how it seemed like there was almost a bit of entitlement to those guys in the room. Imagine what it has to be in Chicago. So I feel bad for the guy, and I really hope, like, I think Blackhawks fans were totally unfair to that guy. And I hope he gets a job somewhere else and just sort of, gets some reps in, you know what I mean? And just gets a second chance somewhere, because I think he deserves it.
Yeah. Two things. When you talk about age, I remember that the comparison they had was he played in the World Juniors for Canada with Brent Seabrook.
No way.
Yeah, they're in the same draft class, 2003. So that was when he was hired. I remember the name, and I was surprised that they gave him that level of promotion so quickly, especially for what the Blackhawks were trying to do at the time, because it is unfair to him when you look at where they were when he took over, that whole really quick youth movement. But when I think about that youth movement, they still want it to be kind of competitive. But what I've looked at right now with the results, that anyone not named Kirby Dach has not been very good. Well, they lost Pius Suter, but that's another thing. And now when they went out and spent, it hasn't worked. And I think, it's really early right now, but the fact that they gave up Adam Boqvist and Cole Sillinger, who's remained with the Blue Jackets, has to be a big hit for them. And another first. Yeah.
You brought some, like, I think there's a way to compare this team with, or that coaching situation with, like, Detroit a few years ago when Babcock left and they replaced him with Jeff Blashill. And in a way, like, they were giving Jeff Blashill the chance to work with that team and develop a relationship and develop some type of system with that team. That's why he's still there. There might not be a great team, but that's their coach. Whereas here, they kind of let Joel Quenneville go. They said, okay, we're going to rebuild. And then less than 2 years later, we're sitting here, well, we're not rebuilding anymore. And Colliton's had less than 2 years of NHL coaching experience, and you kind of put him in a crappy situation. Whereas if you just let the rebuild play out, maybe we're having a different conversation about Jeremy Colliton.
Do you want to know how much head coaching experience he actually had before he was named Blackhawks coach?
Like
in general?
2 years?
Yeah, he was all together. If I'm reading this right, he had, of AHL games as head coach, the guy had 88 games. A season and then 12 to start 18-19 is when he came in, of course, was head coach of Chicago. I'm saying, man, I feel bad for him. I feel really bad for him.